Folks, it is Freaky Friday on the Podcast Daily, and there are no bold predictions to be found anywhere. Maybe that's a good thing because so far we've been pretty bad at them. But we are still going to look into the future on this episode. That is Bill Landis and Jeremy Birmingham joining me, Austin Ward. And Bill asked an interesting question earlier in the week. What was it, Bill?
I'm just wondering what you guys think of the Big Ten after 2 weeks, and if you're rethinking at all the pecking order within the conference, given what we've seen from some of the teams that we assumed would be at the top of the conference coming into the season, because it's been a weird couple of weeks for the Big Ten. And I guess you could do a bold P style. If I asked you, assuming we all believe Ohio State will be playing in Indianapolis, who do we now think Ohio State's opponent would be in Indianapolis?
Ooh, I like that one. Okay. I know I'm going to regret saying this, but since it's an overreaction from 2 weeks, I'm going to say it's USC. And as soon as it came out of my mouth, I was like, no, that doesn't sound good. I don't like that at all. But I thought that, there could be a dark horse challenge from Iowa. Like Penn State has looked pretty competitive in one game and not so competitive in another. Oregon, I'm not really sure what's going on there. I know that we can pretty confidently rule Michigan out as a contender here. USC seems to have addressed its defense. And if that's the case, Lincoln Riley is probably going to produce an offense that puts up a lot of points. And Miller Moss looks like he's in pretty decent command of what's going on there. The schedule is not unmanageable, even though it looked pretty difficult when we talked about them in the offseason. So I'm trying to talk myself into it just because they should be good enough to make that run. But the more I say it, the less likely it sounds.
The more you say it, the less you believe it.
Yeah. I just don't think any of that stuff is going to be true. I don't believe in Lincoln Riley, and I'm not convinced that Miller Moss is some sort of game-changing quarterback for USC. So probably what we wind up with is that Oregon's first couple of weeks are a little bit of a fluke, and that they are still the second best team in the Big Ten. That's what I actually think will happen.
You know who USC doesn't play this year is Oregon. And honestly, if I was a conspiracy theorist, which I'm not, I would look at USC's schedule and the way it sets up for them and be like, it almost seems like the powers that be really want it to be USC, because other than
they're making a play on the road against the defending national champ.
Yeah, in September.
Okay.
Let's look at their schedule. They get Wisconsin at home. They get Penn State at home. They get Rutgers at home. They get Nebraska at home. And they get Notre Dame at home. All right. So Notre Dame obviously doesn't count for the conference, but there are road games after the start of October. They play at Minnesota on October 5th. Beautiful time of the year to be in Minneapolis. They play Maryland on October 19th. Beautiful time of the year to be in Maryland. And then they don't
anytime you play Mike Loxley, you're good to go. So that doesn't matter.
I'm saying from a team that's in the West Coast that is going to have to, their road games are at Washington and at UCLA in the last 6 weeks of the season.
UCLA is a far trip, man.
I'm just saying.
Where's UCLA?
USC has Penn State on October 12th, so that's sort of the rubber meets the road day in the Big Ten with Ohio State at Oregon and Penn State at USC. So I think we're better equipped to answer this question after that day, but I think it is shaping up to be USC, because I can't see a world right now, based on what we saw in the first 2 weeks, that Michigan beats USC. So,
yeah, I think USC is going to beat Michigan too. That's why I think my answer to the question is also USC. The schedule is pretty friendly. I'm just giving Burm a hard time. It's an inviting path. I think if USC has its stuff together to get there, I think Maryland.
They don't have to go to any of the traditional Big Ten tough environments.
I wonder about the travel. I wonder about the travel piece of having to fly all the way out to Maryland and then come back home and play Rutgers, which will be a pretty physical test for them. We don't know what the West Coast to East Coast and vice versa travel, what kind of impact that might have on teams.
That does go from Saturday to Friday, so that is a bigger challenge. But that's the one where you look at it and you could see a trap, because that might be a game for Rutgers where they're on the block of are they still undefeated? So it's definitely shaped up to be a much more interesting USC first season than I would have anticipated. And again, if I was a conspiracy theorist, I'd be like, maybe they really want this cross the country rivalry / interest to occur, because USC shouldn't not have been in this discussion 3 months ago.
Well, why
It's a
wouldn't
good
they have
thing
just
you're not. Yeah.
had USC and Ohio State play in the regular season? Because nobody at that time of year goes like, who's going to be really good next year? USC. Nobody thought that.
I don't know. Maybe they did.
Well,
Maybe they did.
It's Friday the 13th.
Those people should be on Bold Peas every
is.
single week because they're clearly geniuses.
If it's not USC, who is it? Still Oregon? Then is that where we all assume? Or
Yeah. I think what's Penn State has to go play at USC. Obviously, has to play Ohio State at home. I still think Penn State's going to lose at least one, probably two Big Ten games.
Penn State has to go to Wisconsin. They play Illinois, which will be a tough game, but it's to be a win. It's at home. They play UCLA at home. They play at USC, at Wisconsin, Ohio State at home, Washington at home, at Purdue, at Minnesota, and Maryland at home. Like it's a pretty favorable slate for them as well.
Yep.
It's pretty interesting, I think, Bill, that you bring up this question, and like certainly it's early. We know that everyone in the Big Ten has a ton of games to play. But one of the first things that came to mind for me last week, 3 things Thursday that I did with Berm, was like, what is an overreaction that I have? And that was that, like, all I did was switch the order of the toughest game for Ohio State from Oregon to Penn State. And I still think that's probably correct. But like, even 1 week later, Penn State then goes out and looks absolutely abysmal for most of the game against Bowling Green. And it's like, well, is this just more of the same from Drew Aller and James Franklin? Are they going to get a lot better as they settle in with the coordinators? Like, I don't know. You and I went through the schedule and the projected win totals over the summer. And it's like, I think Ohio State's schedule is more difficult than it gets credit for. And I still think that is probably true, but I am now having a harder time like envisioning either Oregon or Penn State, and certainly not Michigan, giving Ohio State a real test in the regular season. And that, like, I understand that it's 2 games and they're MAC opponents, the degree of difficulty is going to change. But like when we have this conversation about who's number 2 in the Big Ten through these early junctures, again, only to this point, it's like Ohio State and then a wide gap between everybody else for me.
Yeah, I think I'm probably there too. We'll see if Oregon can get its offensive line stuff together. I guess if it does, then that's more or less the team I thought it was going to be coming into the year. We'll see. That offensive line's been pretty bad through 2 games. And Dylan Gabriel is fine, but not necessarily setting the world on fire through his first 2 starts there either. So I think that team could get markedly better by the time Ohio State goes to Eugene. I might flip my pick on most difficult game too. I might go to Penn State as well. I think Penn State's defense is legit. They just had a bad day against Bowling Green. Drew Aller was still throwing the ball down the field against Bowling Green, which I guess is what you want to see out of him. So I think that team is still potentially dangerous. I'm ready to almost like write off Michigan entirely. I just don't know. I don't know what they could figure out offensively that would make me feel differently about them moving forward. I don't see a whole lot of hope there. So the thing that does make Ohio State's schedule, I think still difficult though, is like people, even though Iowa lost to Iowa State, I still think Iowa's good. And I think Nebraska is going to be an improved Nebraska too. So like you got to play both those teams. I don't think those will be, cakewalks necessarily for Ohio State, but I'm a little surprised. I guess I'm not surprised. And it says maybe more about Ohio State than it does the rest of the Big Ten, but there were 2 weeks into this, and it does feel like Ohio State is still very much on a tier by itself in the conference.
That middle stretch of Michigan State, Iowa, Oregon, Nebraska, Penn State is a pretty good gauge of where you're going to be in the Big Ten. I mean, Ohio State should be the favorite to win all those games, but that is going to be a stretch that's going to really show us exactly how much better Ohio State is than everyone else, because that is not an easy stretch. And I know it's not the SEC's murderer's row, if what people will try to say perception wise, but when you talk about Oregon, the thing that I thought the preseason discourse around Dylan Gabriel was ludicrous. I do not understand how that guy was the Heisman favorite when you stack him up next to Will Howard, and all of the conversation about Will Howard was, he's not even going to be the starter at Kansas State. Who cares if Ohio State brought him in? And like Dylan Gabriel is not going to be the starter at Oklahoma if he stayed. So like they were in very similar positions. but yet I don't know if it's just the sex appeal of Oregon or whatever. People started talking about him like he was the second coming of Steve Young, and I don't know where that came from, but I still think Oregon is going to be the toughest road game because just the travel itself is a bear and something that's going to be so foreign to Ohio State, because the only time they've ever traveled that far for a game is when you've had a week to be out there and prepare for a Rose Bowl. So it's definitely different, more so than Penn State, which is a 1.5 hour flight and in the same time zone and all those things. So I'm not going to overreact to Penn State's game against Bowling Green. Clearly that first half, their defense was asleep. The second half, they gave up 3 points. And if I have a concern in that game, it's the Penn State offense, which looked pretty much exactly what it looked like before, which is sloppy and uncoordinated. And then you get a turnover and then you break a 35-yard run with 3 minutes left. That makes you feel comfortable. But their offense tried to give that game back to Bowling Green. They did not look competent offensively. And that's the problem with Michigan. That's the problem with Penn State. Do I think Penn State's better positioned to fix it? Oregon, clearly the offensive line has some issues, but their defense is doing good work. They had some problem with Ashton Genty last week, but everyone has in the last 2 years. That is at least encouraging, because I think Oregon's heading into the season, the strength of their unit was expected to be the defensive line. That has not been the case the first 2 weeks, which is a surprise to me. But Ohio State should be the best team in the Big Ten, and to watch the rest of the teams shift around and try to get position for the stretch run, which is obviously a while away. But I think we're seeing the league kind of shake out how people would have expected. Like, here's Ohio State, and then there's chaos.
Yeah. What do you guys think of Nebraska?
I would have liked to have seen something more convincing from them on offense against Colorado. I just don't. Yeah. I think that, and maybe by the time Nebraska gets to the horseshoe, like some of the growing pains with Dylan Raiola, if that's what we have to chalk it up to, like maybe Nebraska's probably really pleased with 28 points given some of the offensive performances they've turned in over the last couple of years. But I thought there were probably a lot more opportunities for Nebraska to pull away and win more convincingly than they did against a Colorado team that I think is pretty poorly coached and disjointed and no chemistry, cohesion, portal additions. All like I think Colorado was really bad, and that's going to play out as they move forward. So the schedule still sets up for Nebraska. I think Matt Rule has probably put them in a lot better position to just make life uncomfortable for everyone that the Huskers play. I think that's the mark of a good coach, and they brought in a good one. But what does that mean for Nebraska in the grand scheme of things? They'll beat everyone that they should, and once they play the top 25% of the Big Ten, which we're trying to figure out exactly who all qualifies in that realm, they're going to look bad. Like, I don't think that they could play a competitive game with Ohio State in any way, shape, or form. But that doesn't mean that they're not an improved team.
Yeah, I think that game's going to have a lot of build up, and then what we actually see on the field when Ohio State hosts Nebraska in a couple of weeks is going to be a fairly overwhelming performance for Ohio State. I think Colorado is very bad. I don't think anything we saw from Nebraska is truly indicative of what that team is. I think it is an improved team, and they're going to go to a bowl this year, and Matt Rule's doing a nice job there, but they're not. I don't think it's quite ready to hang with Ohio State unless Dylan Raiola makes massive gains in the next 3-4 weeks, and they're in a position where they're going to let him really throw the ball around the entire field. Like against Colorado, he was throwing almost everything behind the line of scrimmage. So I think they'll try to probably protect him in a similar fashion when they're actually facing a good defense against Ohio State. Like the fact that they played that way against a Colorado defense that I think would provide a lot of inviting opportunities to try to put up points, I think tells you how they're going to try to maybe shelter Dylan Raiola in his first year. But it'll have a big game feel going into it when Nebraska comes here, because as long as I think the only other maybe challenging game Nebraska has before then is Rutgers coming to Lincoln. If Nebraska wins that game and is unbeaten coming to Ohio Stadium and potentially a top 15-ish kind of team, that'll be portrayed as a big deal, but I don't think we'll actually feel like one when Ohio State plays them.
Yeah, I think a lot of things can be true. Matt Rule's a really good coach. They are a much better team than they were a year ago. They are probably not concerned about winning 45 to 10 like they could have won on Saturday, because Matt Rule is an NFL coach who says, let's get out of here with the win. This game's over. They clearly.
I don't think you can call Matt Rule an NFL coach.
That's where he coached last. And I think you gain a perspective of, I want to win this game and get my guys out of here healthy. And when you're up 28-0 at half, you don't have to do a lot to get your point across. I think they obviously really like what they've seen with Dylan Raiola, but don't trust him entirely yet. Because as Bill mentioned, like 90% of the passes seemed like they were within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. That game to me in October 26th is shaping up to feel like the Michigan State game in 2022, where they come in undefeated and they're probably going to be number 11 or 12 in the country. And I think Ohio State will beat them by 50 points if they want to. And that might be a game where Ohio State wants to, if you know what I mean, for a number of reasons. But they are much better. I think they're going to lose to Illinois at home next week. So I don't think they're going to be undefeated, but their schedule is easy. And like, we look about the Big Ten, and there was all this talk about the schedule and no more divisions and all that crap. And then you look at what they have. They have Illinois, Purdue. They get Rutgers at home. They travel to Indiana and Ohio State. The only like traditional Big Ten East team they play is Ohio State and Rutgers and Indiana. So it's a really manageable slate for them. They don't have Penn State. They don't have Michigan. Like it's a pretty easy, no Oregon. Like it's a real easy road for them until they play Ohio State. So
yeah, I was going to say the same thing. You mentioned the fake top 10 matchups with Michigan State that the Buckeyes have hosted. They've also had a few of those against Nebraska in the dozen years that I've been covering them, where it's like, oh, the Huskers are back and they're really competitive. And then they come in, and I think it was the Bradley Roby pick six game and 2013,
I think,
beat them by 50. Like that would certainly be within the realm of possibility for me. But that's where I'm trying to look and see. I think that's why I'm giving Ohio State like credit, and why I'm saying it's one at the top and then the huge gap to the others, because I'm not saying that I think that Nebraska is not improved or a good team, or that Michigan State showed some signs of life. They didn't look very good in the opener, but they won on the road against Maryland, which, as much as I want to poke fun at Mike Locksley, that's still a pretty significant win. And early in the year, the Terrapins are healthy and all those things. Like the teams in Iowa, they can bounce back. As you said, Bill, I've been a believer in that Ferentz philosophy with relying on a defense and being really physical and assignment sound. Like I still think those things could make for an uncomfortable afternoon for Ohio State, but like the weaknesses that Oregon has shown, the inconsistency from any James Franklin team, let alone in games against Ohio State, and the complete abomination of what Michigan is on offense right now, I'm like having a hard time like thinking that this isn't one of those 2019 Ryan Day Ohio State seasons where they just go through and they don't play a game that's decided by fewer than 10 points. And I know that that's also like a crazy thing to say off of 2 weeks, but that's basically how I feel about the talent and the coaching and everything that we've seen, because 108-6 against anybody through the first two games is significant. Like it is, whether people want to diminish the teams that Ohio State played or not. They went out there and handled their business in a ruthless way.
Yeah. I think it could look like 2019. Which I wasn't. I thought Ohio State was going to win the Big Ten, but I didn't know. I guess I didn't think I'd be looking at it as perhaps as dominant a fashion as it feels like it might be now after 2 weeks. But that's a credit to Ohio State, but also I think says something about teams in the Big Ten figuring it out. Maybe chief among them, like Michigan. I'm a little surprised by just how out of sorts Michigan looks through 2 weeks. I didn't expect them to beat Texas. I thought Michigan might hang with Texas, and like that didn't happen. Are you guys surprised at all about how bad Michigan looks right now?
My bigger surprise is not that their offense is anemic, like that was expected. They look out of shape on defense, which is not something that they have looked in the last. And there's a lot of guys that Jim Harbaugh took with him to San Diego. The discussion around Ben Herbert, their strength and conditioning coach, or whatever you want to call him, whatever he was their scientist, their mad scientist of the of the offseason, like they look different. And what surprised me about the Texas game was not the Texas won. They could have won that game similar to the Nebraska-Colorado game, where I think they could have went up and won that game by 45 points had they really tried in the second half. But it was that Nebraska seemed to do whatever they wanted Texas seemed to do whatever they wanted offensively to Michigan, as opposed, like I didn't expect Michigan to score. I did not expect for Texas to just kind of carve them up like they did. And it wasn't all just Quinn Ewers through the air, like the ability to pass, to run the ball in the middle of the field. They did a lot of really excellent work with like shifts and motions and getting guys away from Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham. Like it seemed like Michigan had no answer. And if you're Ohio State and you're Chip Kelly, you have to look at that film and be like, yo, that is interesting, because that did not look like the Michigan defense that we've seen. And for a team that's still heavily relying on 3 guys that are going to be top 10 picks in the NFL draft, probably, like that was pretty eye-opening.
Yeah.
I think maybe too much deference was paid to those really good defensive tackles and an elite corner. And like, I'm just speaking for myself, because I was like, well, Michigan's defense is still going to be elite, and that's going to keep them in games. When we had the conversation about, is the schedule set up where they could be a 10-win team? It's like, maybe that defense is number 2 in the country again, or in the top 5, because those 3 players are really good. But like, this defense is not going to be good enough to be top 5 in the country, because those are the only 3 players that are really doing anything of consequence. I thought the linebacker play, from what I saw last week against Texas, was like unidentifiable. Like I couldn't even.
If I wanted to bring that up, but like Ernest Hausman and Jay-Sean Barham and those guys, like physically are really, really talented, but they seem to be very easily confused. And if that's what Michigan's defense is going to look like, the rest of the schedule that they are playing, and again, USC, who does a ton of motion stuff, like that's going to be fascinating to watch.
Yeah. And I think that as much as anything, Stallions aside, like the ability for Michigan's linebackers to get them right and to stop Ohio State's rushing attack and fill gaps and get guys to the ground, like was really, really important. And I don't think that they have that. And that's not a good place to be weak, especially in the Big Ten. And I think that some of the stuff that Texas was doing a week ago, as Berm said, like Chip Kelly and Ryan Day, I'm not saying that they're looking ahead to the last week of the regular season, because it's win the moment and win one day at a time, sure, and all that stuff now. But like when they get to that, I think they're just going to be absolutely licking their chops at the opportunities that are going to be available to them. And it's like if we talked about that matchup a month ago, so well, how is Ohio State going to manage? They're going to have a new guard. They have a new center. And it's really, they've been played in the first 2 weeks with 2 new guards and a transfer center. Like that's the matchup. Can they handle Michigan on the interior? That's been the strength of Ohio State's offensive line in some ways. Like Seth McLaughlin has played at a very high level through 2 games, and Donovan Jackson will be back, and Tegra Shabola appears to be taking quite well the lineup. So if that's the situation, I don't know how you could go through and find any matchup that favors Michigan at this point, like on anywhere on the field.
Yeah, I don't think so either. And I think I bet that Ryan Day and Chip Kelly and those guys are taking a look at that this week. I think you don't have a game. They had mentioned, both Ryan Day and Jim Knowles both mentioned, right? You look at things down the road when you have a little bit of time to do so. I bet they were looking at what Texas did to Michigan pretty hard. I don't. They're just like, there are holes in that defense that I wasn't anticipating, and there's certainly truth to like the Connor Stallions of it all, right? It's like, well, defense is harder when you don't know what the offense is doing before the ball is snapped. But even beyond that, there's like personnel deficiencies there that I wasn't expecting. The other side of the field opposite Will Johnson just seems kind of ripe for the pickings, and I don't think the linebacker play is very good. And
losing Rod Moore,
losing Rod Moore, and like Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham are going to have to play a whole lot more this year too, because they don't just generally don't have the same depth that Michigan had last year on the defensive line, or really on the entire defense.
Without looking, and this is not a betting show, okay? That's on KOTN, Kings of the North, on Friday mornings. If you're watching this, you should hop over there, because I believe it runs at 5 a.m. on Friday. What do you think the number is right now for Michigan and USC next weekend? How many points is Michigan favored by right now as we record this?
3.5.
I don't think they should be favored at all.
They are favored. So I'll give you that.
1.5.
9.5.
Oh my God.
Where's my phone?
I already got mine. I would never keep it too far away from me.
So there, I just saw that, and I am absolutely blown away that after these first 2 weeks that we've seen, Michigan is a 9.5-point favorite in a game that has an over/under of 53.5. So
I'm going to be covering the rest of the season from Malibu.
that's a 31-21 Michigan win by the score. Like that's.
I don't know if Michigan's going to score 31 against Arkansas State this week, unless the defense scores twice.
It's I'm just telling you, this is not a betting show, but if you're hearing this, America, and you can get on and get that number right now, I would strongly recommend doing it.
Yeah.
Whew. Okay, well, that is a bold P. So we got there anyway on a future-looking Freaky Friday on the Podcast Daily.
Can I got to say, I want to go back in time. I told Austin this last week, but and when we did the Thursday Thoughts show, or 3 Thoughts Thursday, or whatever the hell we call it, what we've seen out of Michigan State in the first 2 weeks has been a pleasant surprise in East Lansing. They obviously schedule is kind of nice. You get the first Big Ten head-to-head matchup for Jonathan Smith, and they go to Maryland, which is always a place where you can almost count on being given a win, and Maryland certainly gave that to him. With Aiden Childs not playing particularly well the first 2 weeks, for Sparty to be 2-0, I think is really encouraging. And that game on September 28th for Ohio State and East Lansing, we haven't seen a time for that yet, right? Are we expecting that to be a night game?
It is very much in flux, I think, for that weekend right now. So I don't think Ohio State knows what time to expect for that game right now, because things keep changing, as we mentioned, pretty significantly in the Big Ten from week to week. So I think that one's going to be on hold for the time being.
But I think Michigan State, that game, like Austin, we talked about it in the offseason. Like you're like, oh, Michigan State's that's going to be an okay game. I did not believe that a month and a half ago. I do now. I think it will be. I thought that the schedule ramped up perfectly for Ohio State to Oregon, and now I think that it even ramps up more perfectly, because the Michigan State game on the road provides a really good barometer for Ohio State at the end of September.
Yeah, I think so. Michigan State is 2-0, which I wasn't expecting. It's going to win this week against Prairie View A&M. It plays at Boston College, which is currently ranked, next week.
Yeah.
If BC beats Mizzou this week, which I think is possible, and then Michigan State beats them, I think you're going to have a ranked Michigan State against Ohio State, like a ranked unbeaten Michigan State.
How many points? So Missouri has not given up a point yet this season. Now we're really diving off the deep end here. But Boston College, who I think we can all view as a honorary Big Ten team now that Bill O'Brien's the head coach there, longtime Big Ten offensive coordinator Bill O'Brien. How
developed here, baby?
How many points does Boston College, whose offense looked really fun against Florida State, which is obviously the only game that matters because whichever high school team they played last week didn't count. So how many points do they score against Missouri?
21.
I have no idea, nor do I care.
Interesting.
Well, it's they have the former Ohio State offense on the field.
Yeah,
at Boston College. You got to pay attention.
The temporary Ohio State offense, I think, is a better word for it. I wasn't prepared for that question, so I'm simply not going to answer it. And we're just going to wrap up a Freaky Friday episode.
Missouri's a 16.5-point favorite.
Berm is doing some heavy duty preparations for his gambling apps right now. I'm going to let him get back to it. I hope you all have a great improvement weekend. We have another show coming later. Bill and I doing some home breaks with Card Collector 2. There, as Berm said, there's the gambling show on Kings of the North. And then it's going to be pretty quiet around here on the podcast. But the Kings of the North post-game show will be what time, Bill, on Saturday? TBD?
11 p.m. Yeah.
11
right as Indiana is polishing off a win in the Rose Bowl against UCLA.
Is Doug doing that show from a hotel, or is he driving back from Madison?
He will be in a hotel for that one. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to say that would be a challenge.
Yeah. All right. So look forward to that content coming, and then we'll be back on Monday with a new week, the Podcast Daily, getting ready for Marshall Week for Ohio State. Enjoy your weekend, folks. For Bill Landis and Jeremy Birmingham, I am Austin Ward. We'll see you later.